Hello, and welcome to What Moves Us, the podcast where we ask, what moves us? Or more accurately, what's going to move us in future?
We look at debates, themes, and decisions of the minute that will impact on the way we get about in the future. Hey, Liam.
Hey, Johanna, how are you doing?
I'm fine. How are you?
I am fine. Are you in London or in Pitlochry?
I'm in Pitlochry.
What's the weather
And
in Pitlochry?
not as sunny as they were saying it was going to be on the weather forecast yet, but I'm shortly to go out and go for a walk. So we shall see if it gets better.
In your short
But
shorts?
we've already had excitement this morning because I've had a standoff between one of my cats and a pheasant. Yeah, it's all drama here.
Well, isn't that exciting? Not had a fight with a pheasant in London.
We have a regular visitor in our garden.
Right. Fun. Have you been down recently?
Um, I I was down last week when you were in Wales.
And how are your journeys?
Um, Going back was fine, bit disrupted going there, which was quite interesting because I had already intended to get off at Preston to do a call because the connectivity on the West Coast is absolutely terrible. And as I discovered the week before when I was down, it is not stable enough to do a video call whilst moving. So I planned my whole journey around having lunch at Preston, doing my call, and then getting back on the train. And it was a good call because there was a broken rail just south of Preston, which meant there was delays for a couple of hours. So I wasn't disrupted at all because of that.
Oh, good. Planning ahead.
That's obviously the way to do it.
Yes. Yes, you mentioned I went to Wales last week for the RIA Innovation Conference, which took place in Newport. Um,
And how was Newport?
Newport's very nice. It's got a fancy new, well, I guess it's now not new, but it's got a fancy station. It's like two donuts with a bridge in between.
Oh yes, that's been there quite a while, hasn't it? So how was the innovation conference?
Um, would it be a pun if I said innovative? It was good to see everyone. Um, Lots of the normal rail crowd were there, I guess. Quite a lot of network rail people and quite a lot of suppliers. Yeah, what
Do
would
you
I say is
see,
the
I mean, like, do you see anything innovative? I mean, you said, would it be a pun if you said innovative? But did you really see anything innovative? Was there
well,
anything?
yes, because I saw our members there. There was Tended, there was One Big Circle, there was Atmo, there was Data Wharf, there was Crosstech. So obviously we were the innovative gang. But what do we see that was innovative? I think just the suppliers responding. Um, what I think is a challenge that I have been seeing at a number of events I've been to recently is how do you what's the best way to say this? The tech coming forward isn't the tech that the industry is working on. So obviously we released our what I just said doesn't make any sense at all, does it? We
No.
released our report, Skills Beyond Scale, that talked about AI skills and technologies coming along in 3 to 5 years. And if you go to an event now, if you go talk to anyone in an industry now, what they are doing is commissioning newer, shinier versions of what we already have. So, for example, a signaling system and a new signaling system. But what that isn't doing is rebasing what you actually need. And lots of the technology coming forward is all encompassing platforms. So it's not that you need a signaling system, you need a new way to run railways. And there is not a way for us to procure that because when you start to look at these things, the only person with actual overall responsibility is basically the Secretary of State because they're the only one who actually sits across everything. So can talk about these giant platforms going forward. So I would say that that's the challenge that
Well,
our industry, as well as every other industry, needs to respond to.
so that's interesting, isn't it? Because our theme for today's podcast is about mind the gap, where UK rail needs to be innovative in tech. So, in terms of that challenge you're seeing, what's the answer? how do we fill that gap, and that bridge between what the industry is doing now, what our startups can offer and what tech can offer, and what we need in 5 years' time.
Well, it is April 1st, so have to be careful
And
what I
I've
say.
already fallen for hundreds of probably gags already this morning.
Um, I always say, well, it's isn't it mighty convenient that we are uh starting a new cross rail bringing together track and train organization that has oversight for all of these things.
But
That's what.
still a long way off though, isn't it? I mean, like,
Well, I think it's with.
timescales, I mean, like, are saying that the organisation won't be in place until 2029. Yeah, and here we are. I mean, we're only in 2025, and I think that's quite interesting in itself. Not from a startup or a tech point of view, but it's been announced this week that Andrew Haynes is stepping down from retiring from Network Rail.
Mm.
And I hadn't realised that he'd actually been in post 7 years. And you think, goodness me, where's all that time gone and what has changed in that time? Because this obviously, when he took over as chief executive, it was in response to the failure of the Thameslink and the Northern timetable introduction. So he was brought in to be that steady state of hands and to lead reform. And here we are 7 years later, and we still don't have reform. And we haven't even really had much shuffling of deck chairs either.
Well, as someone who used to work at HS2, I would like to know where my HS2 train is because that was supposed to start running in
I
2025.
think we'd all like to know where those are. I mean, when I was at HS2, I mean, like, I would be in full flight mobilization by now. We'd be testing trains running up and down. I mean, like, I don't know what can you say? I mean, like, was it? I don't know what the fault is. I mean, like, I know there's been a report into it, but I've been avoiding reading it. I think because I don't want to sort of like, I'm worried about the consequences maybe of it. But there's certainly been problems with frequent changes of scope, too many reviews. I don't know. I think there's been wider problems with the supply chain, not in the sense that it's been the supply chain's fault, but I think there's just been so much politics going on, Brexit, cost of living crisis, COVID. I mean, I think there's been a lot of that has fed into the problems with HS2. So I think they're not all of their own making. I think there's just been a lot of external factors to deal with. Yeah,
Yeah.
notwithstanding the complication of building Euston, which I think had been a known problem for a long time, but no nobody was willing to listen or to get focused on the fact that it was a real problem, and actually how could you build something that was just good enough rather than, the um the legacy project that everybody wanted. Because I think that's always the problem with grandiose projects, is that promoters and ministers and that they're always looking for what's going to be my legacy, what can I say that I contributed to, because I will go down in history or whatever, and that was delivering this big scheme rather than actually focusing on what is really important, because you could probably, if you were to look at any sort of like, you know, if you were to sort of like just go down the road to King's Cross St Pancras, I don't think anybody at the start envisaged what that site has turned into. But what they focused in on was the elements that they could control, and then brought it on, bit by bit. So this has been a project that has been in the making since the beginning of the 90s. And is still not finished. And I think you have to take that long-term horizon rather than just thinking about the grandiose scheme, and take it bit by bit, bite bits of the elephant off at a time. And
Right.
that would be my advice. But anyway, we've got a bit off topic.
Well, I was just going to ask before we go back on topic, given that I think we mothballed or paused Euston, is that the lessons being learnt for the other stations on the line?
Which stations?
Well,
The other HS2 stations,
yeah,
or with
the other HS2. There's
um
only three other stations, so
Well, no, I didn't know whether you meant the stations along the West Coast as well, because whilst we focus on the high-speed services and the stations on the new stations that are being built, there will also be, work required to, allow the West Coast to service the new high-speed trains as well as part of the longer term project. So, um I don't I don't know whether lessons are being learnt or whether things are just carrying on, but I think things have changed, so the stations have to change with them,
Okay.
and I think maybe that's the learning is I think the learning is always and I was always this is the lesson I learned from King's Cross, and it was something that I always wanted to promote when I was at HS2, was that things don't stand the same, they change. And whilst we build infrastructure for, you know, 60, 200 years, because we are in 200 years of rail this year, we need to build it so that it can be flexible and adapt to future changes, because with the best will in the world, none of us can predict where we're going to be in 10 years' time. I mean, like, if you'd have said to me in 2016, even at the beginning of 2016, that we'd have left the EU, that we'd have had COVID, that Trump would have been, president, and we'd be sort of like facing all these challenges, and stuff like that. I wouldn't have predicted any of that. I mean, like, some people would have done, but I guess there wouldn't have been many people that would have predicted it. I don't know how many people would have predicted the meltdown of the 2018 timetable, and that we would be seeing the renationalisation of rail. You know, this
True.
stuff is difficult to predict, so what you need to be able to try and do is make things as flexible as possible, I think, within the constraints of what you have.
Right. Would you say, just the last anecdote is, um, when these stations were being planned, and the difference between now is what are there any passenger expectations that have become so embedded and central now were not known or were not catered for in the station designs?
I couldn't possibly say.
Right. Good answer.
But I mean, like, it's a fair point, because I think one of the things that when I was at HS2 was, some of the things that we were looking at was, AI, and technology and data, and maybe even sort of like cashless societies, and and things like that. And I think we were predicting enough about those, but I think probably COVID has helped bring some of those things on that we weren't predicting. But of course, the biggest thing that we had was, or that we didn't think about, and that's come about because of COVID, is just the way travel patterns have changed. People are not commuting in the way that they did. Commuting patterns have changed, and there's been a big growth in leisure.
Mm,
And I think that's probably something that, not specific to HS2, or even is just that I think Department for Transport hasn't responded to this, or anybody in the rail industry hasn't responded sufficiently enough to do this, is the fact that people are travelling for leisure and to do things and for experiences and stuff like that. So you had a scenario at the weekend where there was a possibility that Brighton would be in the FA Cup quarter final, but the Brighton main line was closed.
mm.
And I think that's we talk a lot about it in industry, about better engineering planning, and focusing around what passengers want, and not doing things when, we have high demand, but we're not reacting to it, and I think that's the thing that, sort of like, we need to be doing more, to particularly within AI and tech, and that is to actually do better predicting of that, of where the passenger demand is going to be, and feeding in how these travel patterns and behaviour is changing.
Well, I think that actually brings us back to our theme, because we have been able to predict travel patterns for a long time, and short-term travel patterns, through various different engines and models. The industry's response to that information is always the challenge, because what I was going to go to back to from last week is that a lot of the innovations and a lot of the technology solutions coming forward are brilliant, but they require changes to humans and human processes, which is a whole different ball game,
Yeah.
particularly in our industry.
And I think that is the challenge because if you can predict what, what that travel pattern will be, how do you then marry the infrastructure and that human action to it? Because engineering does not happen overnight, or planning for engineering does not over it. It happens months, years in advance. I mean, like if you're doing a big blockade for something, you're probably planning it now for 3 years in advance. That's sort of like, in order to get certainty on the engineering that needs doing. But how can we actually get better at that? So actually say, so know that we need a blockade to do a piece of work, but actually use the data to then, not say we need to do it at a weekend or a holiday time, whatever, but predict when we need to do it better and also react to it, as part of that process. So not actually just, fixing at the very beginning of the program saying, well, we know we're going to do it in Christmas 2028.
Mm.
Actually say, well, actually, maybe the third week of January might be the better time to do it. Yeah, because I know lots of, like to give an example, and this is a bad example to a certain extent because I've become aware this week that there's going to be some big engineering work on the line north of Inverness up to Wick, and it's going to happen in peak holiday period. And lots of people are saying, why are we doing this in peak holiday period? Well, of course, the answer in Scotland is the weather. They've pretty much got 24-hour daylight. They can work on it all day, multiple shifts, get it done quicker.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of climate, day, because at the opposite end of the year when it might be better, you might only be getting 5 hours of daylight, so there's lots of reasons why you would be doing, but it's how you use all that data in order to predict it, make it more efficient, make it better. But within all this, we've also got to take into account, the climate as well, and what the climate is doing to our track, what it's doing to be able to do weather, because we're not having so much extreme snow weather or cold weather, but we're having a lot more wetter weather, which also affects earthworks and that. And it's a very complicated picture in being able to do that. But it's how we harness all of that to make it better, to do the work, but also so we disrupt passengers less.
Yes. And I think more redundancy would be a good solution. If you do have to close a line, have a diversionary line.
Which in some parts of the country is easier, but and it's that, I mean, and that's interesting. Under rail reform, will sort of like diversions and being able to use put people onto put passengers onto other parts of the network be easier under rail reform, because you won't you won't just have scenarios. So if you were to sort of like take East Coast, you wouldn't just be saying, and there is some of this work already starting to happen, or I've seen it starting to happen. You wouldn't just say LNER is closed. You would in advance say, well, can we, sort of like put some trains into St Pancras? Can we, send passengers to St Pancras and then they can join the train later on, and things, can we do more collaborative working, so that, that's not a digital thing, but, will we start getting some of that back, rather than just saying railways closed?
Well, there was a news articles of Azuma's LNER Azuma's in St Pancras the other day.
That's what I thought, and I've also know that there's been Great Western trains into Euston because of they were being disrupted with some work with HS2. So we're already seeing a bit more of this collaboration going on, and it would be good to see more of that. Yeah,
Yes, collaboration, solution to innovation. I think the human aspect of operating railways will remain a key unlocker to unlocking innovation changes, because we can digitize quite a lot and we can provide much more short-term change is through technology, but we rely on people being out there to drive trains and staff trains and maintain the network, and they need certainty and they have shift patterns.
But you see, that's interesting in terms of a dynamic as well, isn't it? And how that we can make technology work better for us and put the human in where we still need the human. But also what else will happen? Because um at the conference, did they have the robots again?
The dogs,
The dogs, yeah,
Black
the
Mirror
scary
dogs, yes.
dogs.
Yes.
So of course, the dogs can go out and do track inspections, as can some of you. So in some of the inspections can be done by some of the tools that our members have at One Big Circle and Crosstech. They
Yeah.
can do inspection. So some of these things don't necessarily already need the human to do that. So you can sort of like say you've got technology, you've got AI that can do predict maintenance and that, and then it's only, can you actually then speed up and get better maintenance on track because you've got all these tools that can help the human.
Um, yes, I would say so, but that, yeah, it would just take longer to embed in that process, but should make it safer for people overall.
So there's the safety element, and but not just sort of like making it better overall, but I mean like make better jobs. So actually what you're doing is you're not getting people doing sort of like the the boring stuff, which is the inspecting and the predicting what needs to be done and stuff like that. You're using tools, best practice, and actually the humans doing the really intelligent, stuff, the fixing and the repairing and deciding what needs to be done when it needs to be done and that.
Yeah.
Which comes back to another story that was on the news this morning about how one of the issues in general is that we need more engineers. Yeah, I mean, like, I know we've already talked about the skills gap and that, but we still need more engineers in our country. So despite all these data improvements and needing an AI and what it can do for us, at the end of the day, we still need a skilled workforce to do all of this stuff.
Yes. Isn't that the idea? Is that more people do STEM subjects? Are we hoping that more people do STEM subjects?
But how do we get people to do more STEM subjects, and how do we encourage people into rail with those skills?
Um, I'm I have many solutions to that. One would be they don't necessarily need to come into rail with those skills. They can just work for a company who supplies to rail. We don't need to brand the people with rail across their forehead if they fancy doing some work in our industry.
So I didn't phrase that very well. What they don't need to be rail people at all. I guess what I mean is sometimes rail doesn't necessarily have the best press, so so people aren't aware that that there are interesting jobs that rail does tech. It's it's it doesn't necessarily have a good reputation against maybe other cooler sectors that do tech. I mean, like, will rail make you a millionaire? I mean, because I think that's one of the things, isn't it? When people are thinking about this area, they all think they're going to be the next, Mark Zuckerberg or something.
Well, again, this comes down to the platforms that we mentioned at the start. If you can invent a platform that Rail uses, then yes, because Rail would use your platform. And also, if you develop a product that Rail needs, then potentially you will be able to sell that and sell your company. But working as a salaried person in Rail, then I don't think you're going to be a millionaire
That's
because,
two different types of people, isn't it?
yeah.
So, do you think rail reform's going to make this easier? Do you think we're going to see change soon?
Those are two different questions also because I'm not sure when rail reform is going to show fruits. Although we do have, what, 2 months left of until the next rail company becomes public sector, Southwestern. Um, do I think it's going to make it easier? I'm worried that it won't, because I'm worried that it will just end up being a blanket system instead of more agile operators around the country. But I think that they're removing sort of the, what do you call it? Discombobulation does mean that whoever is at the top is accountable for delivering actual tangible benefits to passengers, and the contractual and legal issues you won't be able to hide behind whose fault is it. It will be one person's fault.
Do you think it will be one person's fault?
Yeah, because they will be the head of the organization and they will have you would assume, ultimate command and control of the organization.
There's a whole new thing to debate there.
There is, but I think that that's where your opportunity is, because at the moment it's very difficult for people in track to work with people in trains or to work with ticketing suppliers, and if they're all brought together under the vision where they're all brought together, then you would imagine that they become colleagues and therefore they're all working towards the same direction, and therefore you can imagine that it should be easier to deliver things. Whether it's easier to supply into that organization, I'm not sure, because you will end up with some interesting procurements. But to actually deliver changes, you would imagine that a top-down person saying this is going to happen, then everyone can work towards the same goal and will
Let's
have
hope
the same
so.
incentives.
And if you get that, I mean, like you often say, that innovation needs to happen by everybody rather than by a department or one person. Do you think if everyone's clear on that goal, then you'll get more innovation at at the front, at the coalface, shall we say?
I would hope so, because I think if you start to see successful projects being driven through, then it would inspire other people to actually sponsor and push through new ideas, new ways of doing things, and new products. Whereas at the moment, I think they might get burnt out trying to push through something which is very difficult to do in our current structure.
Well, let's hope that is the future vision.
Okay, should we leave on a positive note? That's definitely going to be
Yes.
the future revision.
That was what I was thinking.
How can small companies make sure that they are engaged with this future vision process?
They can take part in the consultation.
And they can join the Rail Innovation Group.
Absolutely.
We should just put this on our outro as well. Join.
Joy.
Right. See you later.
Speak to you later.
Thanks for listening to another episode of What Moves Us. We hope we moved you. For more episodes, you'll definitely want to subscribe to our channel.
Till next time.